Chapter 7, Kinesiology 223. Still on the topic of feedback reinforcement and motivation. This is presentation number 3. Let's get going. With feedback, and we talked about it earlier, you have positive and negative feedback, and feedback can be verbal and nonverbal. When you coach, you look to have your feedback be in varying amounts. The book espouses a more systematic approach with younger athletes early on when learning a skill, which I get and I understand. But your feedback will actually end up being delivered in more varying amounts. You try to be consistent. You try to have the balance between positive and negative feedback. But I'll point this out, and I said it earlier. That feedback can come from the competition. It can come from the coaches. It can come from your other teammates. And those are all coachable moments if you have an athlete who is intrinsically motivated to be better, to try to learn more from everything around them. And it becomes almost like an environmental driver, and these extrinsic things help them to become more or better as an athlete. But it is different from athlete to athlete, as I mentioned before. With feedback absolutely is based off of behavior. And when you think of feedback, like what is even the dynamic of that word in delivering feedback to somebody? You're giving them feedback on something they have done, whether it's writing a paper, doing an assignment, a post and response, or doing a power clean. Feedback is something that is used in a much bigger process, and it's going to be based upon a behavior. It's going to be specific to that behavior, and it's going to be used to either modify or reinforce the behavior that was performed. And, it's going to be used frequently, right? There's no doubt about it. And one of the key parts is, if you're really trying to reinforce a teaching or coaching point, if something happens organically in the moment and your athlete has this wonderful kinesthetic epiphany moment, like I've said before, or they just get a certain movement pattern, to paraphrase that, you want that reinforcement to be immediate, and you want it to be, with purpose, and you want it to be precise in that moment, because otherwise your athlete completes a movement and then they do a whole nother series of other activities, and whatever you just wanted to teach and reinforce is now gone, out of their motor cortex. Their bodies won't really remember it. But if you do it in the moment and it's precise, your athletes will key into that. And then you can reinforce this by hopefully having them do the same drill again. Although, as we said earlier, sometimes it's difficult when it's organically done to be able to get the exact replicated movement pattern. Oh boy. But you certainly try, because if you have something you really want to reinforce, that's when you do it in the moment at that time. Now with this, I'm totally on board with this part of the book when they talk about, performance feedback is used for improving performance within the business industry. And many times we talk about people being on teams. This is, part of my accounting team. This is part of my finance team. Businesses like to have a team approach and have people working together. If you find yourself to be a leader in that environment, or maybe you're a GM of a fitness facility, you have to view this in terms of almost like being a coach, and how you're going to now work with your people. And you might have some who are intrinsically motivated, some are extrinsically motivated, some will need to be handled a little different than others. But what you find is, with both these paragraphs, it indicates that feedback is effective in enhancing performance. Pretty straightforward. So, you're giving feedback to your people, and then also, how they provide the feedback makes a difference. And I say it all the time, you can have negative feedback or, a negative message to change a behavior, but you can do it in a positive manner. And I will tell you that when you get into the general population, you will have some people that they will already have just a base level anxiety from being at work. And here you are trying to bring them, content to be able to course correct or have some type of adaptation to a behavior. And it might even freak the person out that you're standing there at their cubicle at their desk. So, you have to be able to effectively deliver that message to your employee and do so in a way that's a positive way, that's non-threatening, with the understanding that, look, you know, John, if you do this way, it'll actually flow through and it'll make life a lot easier for you, but you're going to be more productive, right? And that's kind of what you want to be at work. So it'll make your life easier on one side because you're doing it correctly. And now when you do it this way, it makes your life, it makes your work more productive down the road. So you can kind of bundle these up, you know, with your people to be able to have them understand that you're coming to them with a positive mindset. Now, make no mistake about it. We've all had bosses who are punitive and they just like to hammer people down. I hope you're not that type of boss when you get into the workforce. Hope you learn from this class. All right. Two main functions of feedback. You want to both motivate and instruct. And, you know, they list 3 ways to go about this, and I tried to parse this together here on the slide. And, you know, they talk about, you know, when you look at these ways that motivational feedback helps performance, it can, you know, things like enhance confidence, inspire greater effort and energy expenditure, and create a positive mood. And again, if you're somebody who's a coach or a GM of a facility, or, you know, you're working as an athletic trainer of some variety or a physical therapist, you know, there's ways that you can exude this to your people that you come in contact with, both one-on-one on a granular level with your athletes or your patients, or you can do this with your coworkers as well. It becomes kind of like a spillover effect and a halo effect to other people. Feedback also provides valuable reinforcement to the performer, which we talked about earlier in terms of providing that feedback so they can become better. When they're working or doing their accounting spreadsheets, you go over as a boss and explain to them maybe there's a better way to do it. Establish goal-setting programs, and this is kind of key in terms of being able to allow your people the opportunity to sit back and you allocate time at work for them to come up with goal setting, or you allocate time at work for them to be able to come up with something as simple as, here's how I'm going to win the week, and their strategy for knocking out different projects during a week. Instead of it just being a constant stream of background noise and work that never seems to end, you know, it gives them purpose to be able to check things off of a list. With you know, with all of these, you are absolutely going to have times, whether it's an employee, a client, a patient, or an athlete, where your athletes will need that extrinsic motivation to kind of help them overcome certain challenges. There are times where they might process and look at something and say, and we talked about it in a previous presentation, where that's too much, I can't do this, there's self-doubt that creeps in. And, you know, you may have to be the voice that kind of comes up to the one side of them and says, yeah, you could totally do this. You just need to take it step by step. Let's go ahead and go through the process. And that's where you become kind of this benevolent coach that mentors and provides stewardship and leadership to a degree as well for your athletes to be able to complete these skills. All right. Instructional feedback, you know, provides information about these 3 things here. And, you know, it's used when an athlete needs specific and actionable advice to improve their technique or knowledge. So notice there's a difference between these 2. And if we look at this and we go, okay, they work together, right? And they're not mutually exclusive. But when you look at instructional and motivational feedback kind of together, you know, they both are goal-oriented. They're both kind of supportive. They're both communication-focused. You know, they both aim to improve performance and outcomes, whether it's academic, athletic, or professional. You know, both types of feedback, you know, they guide the recipient towards achieving a specific goal. Could be short-term, could be longer-term. Both types of feedback, you know, they provide support for the individual. You have the ability to provide different types of support to the individuals, whether it's positive or negative. You can have this kind of feedback loop where you have this, if you will, more guidance for the instructional side and more encouragement, if you will, for the motivational side. But you start to create these 2 different main dialogues, one of which is, here's what you need to do, here's how I need you to do it, nice job on how you did that. You know, it becomes like this ebb and flow between these 2 strategies. And then you have communication focus, right? Because as a coach, you're going to have to, you need to be able to communicate with your team and your individuals one-on-one. And you have to understand that, as we've said 1,000 times, depending upon the person that's in front of you, you may have to tailor or temper your message for that person to really receive the message. They may hear it, but you want them to receive it, process it, and implement it. And you want the desired outcome from that. All right, so let's go into knowledge of performance. Knowledge of performance, the KP on this, I think it's kind of self-evident, right? You talk about you have to have an understanding of the movement pattern to be able to offer feedback regarding the movement pattern. And I will tell you that, as a person who I've coached high-level athletes, when you're working with those athletes, you need to be on your game. You have to have a good understanding of mechanics and how the body moves, and then you have to be able to understand how you can deliver a coaching point that's very succinct and to the point to be able to get the response that you want. Now, the kinesthetic awareness that comes into play and the kinesthetic IQ that you have, where a person really knows their body and they're really dialed into their own body. Oftentimes, when you teach an athlete how to do something correctly, whether it's in a slow movement environment where you're teaching proper technique and then you ask them to implement a drill at a faster pace, or you teach at a faster pace and you've done whole, part, whole, or a combination thereof, what you've done is you've taught their bodies how to remember particular parts of the movement pattern, and then you're asking them to connect those dots. What happens is, as a coach, you have this knowledge of kind of performance and movement, etc. But what you've done is you've implemented into your athletes a series of events that they're familiar with. And so by default, their body has this knowledge of performance. It's like a body of work that they've not fully exploited yet, but you've taught them how to do a movement pattern without doing the full movement pattern. And what you've really done there is you've taken kind of this knowledge of performance mindset and you've implemented it into your athletes where they are now more effective at being able to take a gross motor skill because you've taught them the fine motor coordination to do it. All right. So knowledge of results. Now this is a little bit different animal because now you're looking at this going, this places more emphasis on the results of the activity. So knowledge of results would be like how many free throws are made out of 100, where knowledge of performance, where you'd be more focused on how the free throws were made. And I elaborate a lot regarding knowledge of performance, not only from the coaching side, but from the athlete side. But what becomes the feedback on this is the results. How many free throws? And that becomes, if you think of it through, a very objective measure, which is very quantitative. That's right. Very quantitative, not qualitative. And if you look at these two and you juxtaposition side by side and you go, okay, which one would be quantitative? Well, it's the results. Which one would be qualitative? How they made the free throws. Which one's evaluated by the coach and more objective? That's the qualitative side on how the free throws were made. And when it looks in terms of the absoluteness, the objectivity, if you will, of how many free throws are made, the coach really doesn't have to intervene on that. The results are the results. Okay, switching out of that, going to go to the next presentation. Here we go.